Good afternoon, or perhaps good evening already, dear ladies and gentlemen. My name is Trizuljak. I am a historian, writer, and a member of the board of the Hanus Fellowship, which organizes this festival. And it is a great pleasure for me to introduce our tonight's speaker. Karl Washut is a newly ordained Greek Catholic deacon, professor, and president of Wyoming Catholic College in the United States. He grew up in Casper, Wyoming, where, as a teenager, he worked in underground nuclear facilities and coal mines. He graduated in 2003 with degrees in political science and Spanish, and in 2007 completed a liberal arts education, known in Slovakia as classical education, at Thomas Aquinas College. He returned to Wyoming as the first dean of student life at WCC, Wyoming Catholic College. In fall 2009, he continued his studies at the International Theological Institute in Austria, earning a degree in sacred theology. Today, Deacon Washut teaches a wide range of courses at WCC, including theology, philosophy, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the humanities. After several years as academic dean of the college, he was appointed its president in August 2023, a little more than 3 years ago. So from what was said, I think Košice and Professor Karl Washut have more than one thing in common. I think, as I've already said, Karl is a Greek Catholic, and Greek Catholics form an important and lively part of the life of the church here in the Košice city. I think Košice is also a university city with many educational institutes and university institutes. And Karl is not only a professor at the university, but also a university president. And finally, Košice and the larger region of eastern Slovakia is known for wonderful natural areas, including some vast, untouched, and let's face it, rather wild areas of nature, such as the Poliny National Park. Which nicely leads me to the topic of our lecture tonight, which is an education in the wilderness, a Catholic university in the wilderness. Wyoming Catholic College, where Kyle serves as president, is famous and unique in incorporating the experience of wilderness and nature in its formation of young Catholic leaders. I have met and taught a few Wyoming Catholic College students myself in the past, and I can say that they were all pretty tough and fit, but also very deep and kind young men and women. I'm curious to learn more about the education philosophy of Wyoming Catholic College myself, so without further ado, I pass the word to Kyle. So welcome to Košice, and it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you all so very much. It is an honor to be here at the Hanus Festival, to be welcomed to Košice, and to have anyone halfway across the world interested in hearing about Wyoming Catholic College. For those of you who don't know, we are a very young college, started less than 20 years ago. Because in America, that's what you do. You just start colleges or universities at times when you're upset with the current or broken system that you inherit. We are, as noted, unique for our blending of outdoor leadership. Our students spend 3 weeks completely in the backcountry, in the mountains, before they start courses, and then spend another 7 weeks of outdoor leadership over the course of their time, a semester of horsemanship, have a integrated, what you call classics education, though not exclusively what you call classics education, and I'll talk about that, and have distinctive policies to inculcate community in the formation we're offering. But what I want to do tonight when I give the talk is not just have a show and tell about Wyoming Catholic, but rather talk about what are things that we have done in responding to what we see as a real crisis in the Western world that we're facing, that we're all part of, and how we think the lessons we've learned in these last 20 years, what are the principles that we think should be shared most broadly. As I'm going through, you'll see a number of pictures on the slideshow. All of those pictures were taken by our students on various of the outdoor trips. So this is what they are immersed in as they go. I want to begin, though, not talking about Wyoming Catholic College, but talking about something that happened over 150 years ago. I realize in Europe, everyone's used to Mary appearing all over the place. It's more of a regular regional thing. But in America, she's only done it in the United States once that the Vatican has approved. And that was 1 year after Lourdes in 1859. She appeared in a town called Champion, Wisconsin. And while she appeared 1 year after Lourdes, even America didn't really know about it until about 150 years later, where it was finally approved, recognized by the Vatican and approved. But importantly, the bishop who approved and oversaw the approval of the apparition is the same bishop who founded Wyoming Catholic College. And I begin because I think the message of Our Lady of Champion that was delayed for 150 years to become known is deeply bound up with the thing that we are doing at Wyoming Catholic. When Our Lady appeared to Adele Breese in the wilds of Wisconsin in 1859, she gave her a message, just one simple message: gather the young people in the wilderness and teach them for their salvation. Now, in the context of 1859, the message seemed to be gather the illiterate immigrants that are living in the wilds of Wisconsin and teach them basic catechesis. But that message didn't become known for 150 years, and I think that's because Our Lady, especially Our Lady of Champion, likes wordplay. Let me tell you why. You see, before Adele, the visionary, before she had moved to America, she was in Belgium, and as a young girl, she made a promise in Champion, Belgium, to become an Ursuline nun dedicated to teaching. And then when her family announced they're moving to America, she was very distressed, and she went to her confessor, and she said, "What am I going to do? I promised God I'm going to be an Ursuline nun here in Champion." And he said, "Don't worry, God will take care of it." And so she moved to Champion, Wisconsin, which was not called Champion at the time, and Our Lady appeared to her, and Adele started a group of consecrated lay women who never took formal vows, but dedicated themselves to teaching the Christian faith. And when the town asked, "What should we name this location?" Adele said, "Champion," after Champion, Belgium. And so Our Lady has this fun way in Champion of giving a message and then bringing it to completion in a surprising way, maybe with a bit of a pun. Now, the other sign, the thing that Champion's known for, aside from its message of gathering the youth in the wilderness and teaching them for their salvation, is the miraculous stopping of the most devastating fire in American history, which happened 12 years to the day after the apparition of Our Lady of Champion. And that fire still has taken out more acres, taken more lives, and destroyed more property than any fire in the history of North America. And the 5 acres that were closed off by a fence where Adele was dedicated to teaching in response to Our Lady of Champion didn't burn at all. The shallow wells of Champion didn't dry up, though the deep wells of the surrounding area did. All of the cattle that were on Champion survived. So somehow we have 2 things that we want to think about with this miraculous apparition of Our Lady of Champion. 1, a devastating fire that was miraculously stopped. 2, a commission. Gather the young people in the wilderness and teach them for their salvation. So our question is, 150 years later, what is the fire that Our Lady is trying to stop? And what does it mean to gather young people in the wilderness in this time and teach them for their salvation in this way? And I think the fire that we are trying to stop 150 years later is what Pope Francis has called the technocratic paradigm. Pope Francis was developing what St. John Paul II had said in the mid-90s about the culture of death. The commitment to focusing on efficiency and technological progress as the sole defining value. And this is embodied, Pope Francis pointed out, in the very education that we now offer our young people. And I think this comic from an American newspaper, Calvin and Hobbes, captures what the embodiment of the technocratic paradigm looks like in education. Here you have poor 6-year-old Calvin sitting here waiting for the bus, looking forward to 11 more years of school to go, then college, then maybe graduate school, and then I work until I die. And then his stuffed tiger says, "Oh no, it's better than that. All of the money you make while you work will just pay for your kid to do the same thing again." Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. The educational system here, the only value of the educational system seems to be making a cog in the machine to promote profit at the expense of human dignity, at the expense of the common good. Another character that might embody the technocratic paradigm that Pope Francis is so concerned about is this figure over here on the other side of the slide, which is Uncle Andrew from C.S. Lewis's book, The Magician's Nephew. Now, C.S. Lewis in The Magician's Nephew tells the story of the creation of Narnia, this mystical land, and the Christ-like figure who creates Narnia is a lion. And the lion brings the entire world into being through song. And through various events in the story, this magician, Uncle Andrew, and his young nephew end up there watching the lion create the world through song. And he creates this incredibly fertile, vibrant world, so fertile that when a random piece of iron that was brought to this mystical land gets thrown into the ground, it grows like a living lamppost. And the animals are singing, and the stars are singing, and this world is blowing up. And Uncle Andrew is sitting there rubbing his hands thinking, if I can get enough trucks over here, I will make so much money mining this miraculous iron. He is incapable of seeing the glory that surrounds him and is only thinking of how he can develop with technology for further profit. There's no transcendent good, there's no basis in the truth, there's no ultimate beauty that catches his eyes. Everything's obscured by the technocratic paradigm. Now, that technocratic paradigm, on the one hand, is embodied in our education. On the other hand, it's embodied, not shockingly, in our devices. Cultural critics in the United States have been talking about the way Silicon Valley views culture. Because the technocratic paradigm is not just content with making education devoted to creating cogs in the wheel, not just content with reducing all beauty, truth, and goodness for the gross domestic product. The technocratic paradigm also corrupts culture. And since, for generally worse, the United States is exporting its Hollywood culture and its Silicon Valley culture to the rest of the world, the corrupting effect of what we're doing with this technocratic paradigm on our culture needs to be taken note of. And there, that very tiny little fish at the far end of the slide says art. And art's getting swallowed by entertainment, and entertainment is getting swallowed by distraction, and distraction is getting swallowed by addiction, because people who are addicted to whatever the entertainment you create on your devices are going to produce the most user engagement and therefore produce the most money. And that addiction takes over all of the cultural products and consumes and changes them. So in America, instead of playing a sport or even watching a sport, an entire sport, we've now gamified the sports because our attention span only lasts about 30 seconds. And so we have to gamble on what's going to happen in the first 2 minutes of the game and get a kickback or a dopamine hit, as we call it, and then make the next bet. Instead of journalism and newspapers or even multimedia, we have clickbait. Instead of watching enduring films or even short videos, we now have 30-second TikToks. Instead of listening to albums or even a single track, again, 30-second TikToks. Instead of viewing images on gallery walls or even scrolling through them or even viewing them on a screen, we're now scrolling through them on our phone in rapid succession. Handwritten letters have given way to emails, which have given way to short texts, though it may not even have letters, but only, at the best, abbreviations or emojis. And relationships have gone from courtship and marriage to sexual freedom to swiping on an app. The technocratic paradigm is consuming, and it's addictive, and it's deadening. It deadens us to an appreciation of the true, the good, and the beautiful. It prevents us from engaging in cultural activities that previously were the mainstay of our civilization, and it's going to perpetuate a society devoted to efficiency and technological progress, not the true, the good, and the beautiful. That's already happening before we come to the AI revolution, which everyone's talking about. Before we start creating even more powerful machines that replace the activity of thinking and communicating for us, that replace the activity of image creating. That now we're getting these things that do that for us, and since we're addicted to quick, short, 30-second repeatable circuits, it doesn't really matter whether those are grand works of art, we just need them to be addictive. And no one knows what's going to happen in the AI revolution. When you talk to people, sometimes there's grand visionary ideas of what it's going to be like, and other people think it's going to be terrible and apocalyptic. And at least everyone concludes that a culture that is consumed by dopamine addiction and a technocratic paradigm is not going to be able to use AI well. So the question we have for education is not, are we training people who can code AI most effectively? That's not the fundamental question. Are we creating people who can create new technology more efficiently, who can make more profit most efficiently? Those are all good things. It's good to have a career. It's good to have a job. It's good to be able to create effective technology. But our first question needs to be, how are we forming people who will protect the cultural transcendent values and human dignity and a commitment to truth and the common good? And not creating people who are just going to end up enslaved to the technological devices that they've made to distract themselves. That is the civilizational question. And right now, we're the people able to answer it. In a few years, the generation coming up already is spending more than 8 hours a day recreationally on their phones. They're addicted to their phones and never have a memory of not having been on social media or on their phones. It comes to us to try to create a space, to try to offer what Plato called years ago the point of the education in his book, The Republic. We need an education for guardians. We need an education that will form men and women to preserve the good, the true, and the beautiful, the cultural values, the fundamental things that make a free society worth fighting for, worth living in, and worth passing on. And so the question we have is, what are we doing to do that? What are we doing to stop the raging fire of the technocratic culture? And the answer was given to us in America by Our Lady of Champion in 1859. Gather the young people in the wilderness and teach them for their salvation. Because the approach of gathering young people in the wilderness amazingly lines up with the principles of education for guardians that a pagan Plato wrote down in Athens hundreds of years before Christ. Plato writes, "The man who is going to be a beautiful and good guardian of the city will in his nature be philosophic, spirited, swift, strong." And what is this education? It is, of course, gymnastic for the bodies and music for the soul. And then after he establishes that, he then goes on to say, now we'll talk about the kind of education for the mind. And then we'll talk about the way the person so educated puts that education at the service of the city. And before he begins that, he talks about certain things that the guardians are going to need to fast from. And his concern, it's fasting from what he thinks are bad passages in Homer. But we can make that more broad to say fasting from the corruptive influences of the culture. So if we wanted to summarize what Plato would put as the goal or the principle of an education of the guardian, we would get 4 points. 1, fast from the corrupting influences of a culture. 2, immerse in the real and in what he'll call music, what we might call the poetic, or literary, or narrative, or art. 3, integrate, provide an education that focuses on an integrated reality and integrates the knower and all the parts of the knower. And 4, incarnate that education in a concrete community and in concrete acts of service to that community. So I want to walk through each one of those 4 points, because these are the 4 points that we're doing at Wyoming Catholic College. But as I'm citing both the words of Our Lady and the words of the philosopher Plato, I think these are universal principles, not confined to just Lander, Wyoming. So the first is we need a healing fast in the desert. We need a fast from those things that are most corruptive in the culture. And since I've made the claim that I think the technocratic paradigm is what's most corruptive in the culture, I think we need to fast from 2 key things. The first, the addiction to social media and the smartphone. And so since our founding in 2007, we've done something very radical and what everyone called us crazy for at the time. We have asked all of our students to turn their cell phones in for the entirety of the time they're on campus. And we have to do things like invent weird little rooms with phones in them. And the students are very excited about this. They think phone booths, we should market this. This could catch on. We ask our students to have restricted places. The internet's not accessible everywhere on campus, but only in certain locations. And some buildings on campus are completely screen-free, like the cafeteria or the classroom. And there's no internet access in the dormitories. Again, our students are not offline. But what they are doing is they're fasting from the presumption that is now culturally ingrained that you need to opt out of being plugged in, not opt in. But if you have to opt out of being plugged in, the presumption for technology is that technology has constant access to you and is constantly using you. You are not the master using the technology for some good. So we want to give our students space, not because we think technology is evil, but because we think they need to fast so they can rightly use technology at the service of community. And we ask them to fast from a focus on pure efficiency in the workaday world. The degree we offer our students is not connected to any job in particular. It is an education ordered to their formation as guardians, which we think will serve them in their future jobs. But if the 2 dominant things that are corrupting our technocratic paradigm are an endless focus on efficiency alone and an obsession and addiction to the screens, We need a fast from both of those points. But a fast is not enough. Right? We can fast, but if we fast, we need to fill it with something. In another time in my life, I was tied balloon animals as a rodeo clown. And I used to give retreats, and I would fill these balloons with water, and I would tell a student, start twisting the balloon like I do. And they're like, well, if I twist the balloon, it's going to pop and explode all over. I said, oh, okay. Let the water out. So we let the water out. And I said, okay, now tie the balloon. And they said, well, I can't tie the balloon. I can't make it into any shape because there's nothing in it. So the fast is not sufficient. The fast gives us space to do education, but the fast is not the same thing as education. We need to immerse our students in the real. And the story I tell all the students at their freshman orientation is the story of the young man who wanted to become a master jade cutter. And so he apprenticed under the most famous jade carver in all the land. And he walked in and he saw the man carving the jade. And he said, I'm here to learn how to carve jade. And the master said, here. And he tossed him a chunk of jade. And the young man held it. And he held it. And 8 hours went by. And the day finished. And he said, see you tomorrow. So the next day he comes in. The master tosses the young man the chunk of jade again. He holds it and holds it and holds it. End of the day. Master says, see you tomorrow. The third day, he's like, okay, now I'm really going to learn to carve jade. But the same thing happens day after day. Now, the young man's exceptionally patient, far more patient than I would be in this situation. But at some point, after the days have gone by, he is getting really, really frustrated. He walks into the shop and he says, come on, I need to learn how to carve jade. And the man tosses him a chunk of rock and he grabs it and he says, this isn't jade. And the master says, now you're ready to learn to carve. That we need to immerse our students in the real, in real relationships, in reality, in the things that matter most and are most enduring. So they're not caught up like all of these sad stories we're hearing of people who are making their best friends chat GPT. Right? People who haven't tasted real friendship as they get sucked into the fake thing. People who haven't tasted real truth as they can be distracted by propaganda. People who don't have a developed sense of real beauty and so they can look at whatever new image is generated by Grok and think, that's great art. We need to immerse our students in the real. And so that's why we do our outdoor program. That's why we send our students out, so to be able to see the Milky Way when it looks like this on a Wyoming mountain. To be able to go out skiing. And this is what we're going to say gymnastic means in the modern era. Gymnastic for Plato was nude wrestling, nude training of the body. Here we're going to say it's a direct, unfiltered encounter with the realities of the bodily world. The students learn to be in their bodies. They learn what it means to be a bodied creature. It seems to me no accident that much of the confusion about transgender ideology comes shortly after we spent a lot of time having our young people exclusively on screens in a very disembodied way. We need an education that immerses them in the realities of the natural world and what it means to be a body in that natural world. And one of the most important things we do with our students is another lesson we've learned from Plato, which is horsecraft is soulcraft. When Plato wants to describe what it is to train the soul, he gives metaphors from horses. He does it in the Republic, he does it in the Phaedrus, because there's a way of working with horses that is a mirror to our own bodily animal nature. They reveal us to ourselves. Seems to me no accident that in the classical tradition, the two most famous students of Socrates were Plato and Xenophon. Plato wrote the great dialogues that we read and study today. Xenophon wrote the first book on horsemanship. Because Xenophon realized that training a horse and going out on an expedition would also reveal oneself, just as engaging in philosophical dialogue would. Learning to be in the body, learning to move, learning what it means to be part of animal nature. But also testing ourselves. Benedict XVI says in Spe Salvi that Bernard of Clairvaux never sent the monks into the wilderness to have a romantic vision of the mountains. He sent the monks in the wilderness to work, to strain their muscles, to fell the trees, because in the manual labor they were committed to, they would be purifying their souls and coming to know themselves. Just as horsecraft is soulcraft, so is bodily training a disposition to virtue if done in the right setting. Experiencing the natural world, this is a quote from our philosophical vision statement of college, experiencing the natural world through gymnastics instructs us directly in such universal realities as order, proportion, cause and effect, and in fundamental realities such as birth and death. I said last night that the spirituality of the Desert Fathers is rooted in going into the wilderness to become convicted that we're the kind of thing that's going to die. And being out in the natural world makes known to us both the fact that we excel the horse, we can train the horse, we can do marvelous things in our bodies, and our bodies are going to break. Our students have had to oversee helicopter evacuations. They've had to set broken bones. They've had to huddle in the frigid cold. They've spilled their food. They've missed water. They know they're the kind of thing that is going to die. And yet they also know they're the kind of thing that even though they're going to die, is capable of virtue, is capable of transcendent, immaterial greatness. One of our students wrote in the journal First Things, where she serves as an associate editor, "Nature puts you in your place. My muscles ached, my knuckles and ears burned with and my eyes burned with sunspots. My inexperience forced me to rely on the kindness and patience of my classmates. I felt humbled and small, and I also never felt more real." This is the gymnastic education for our times, gathering the youth in the wilderness to teach them virtue, to teach them their mortality, to teach them what it means to be truly alive as the first step in teaching them for their salvation. But immersion doesn't stop with just bodily immersion. We need to fill the wilderness, we might say, with song, with story, with legend. And that's why Plato says, not after gymnastic, the guardians of our culture need to be trained in music. And by music, he means the education according to the muses, according to all of those great works of art, epic and history and literature and lyric and comedy and tragedy and dance. Why? Why do they need to be immersed in these imitative stories? Because these imitative stories, one, help them interpret what it means to be in the wilderness. As I mentioned last night, Moses in Deuteronomy tells the people of Israel, "Tell this story to your children. Tell them of your time in the wilderness, that they may know they went through the wilderness." The story makes sense to us, our place in our culture. It makes sense to us, our place in humanity. It makes sense to us, our mortality and our call for greatness. And so we need to fill the wilderness with story. If we don't, we can end up like Charles Darwin, who spent years and years of his life exclusively in the wilderness. But at the end of his life, he wrote that his mind had become a kind of machine for grinding out general laws out of large collections of facts. Darwin had become a kind of victim of the technocratic paradigm. He said, a man with a mind more highly organized or better constituted than mine would not, I suppose, have suffered as I have done. And if I would have my life to live again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. For perhaps the parts of my brain now atrophied would thus have been kept active through use. The loss of these tastes is a loss of happiness and may possibly be injurious to the intellect and more probably to the moral character by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. For Charles Darwin, he highlights something that I think it is easy for us to lose sight of. That immersion in the real, either through bodily encounter or through poetry, is not something that happens for young children and then you can move on from. It is an aspect of human formation that needs to remain enduring with us. It's not that Charles Darwin never read poetry, but it's as he was trying to create revolutionary scientific theories, he forgot about the humanizing need for weeping or laughing or rejoicing in those great stories of our culture. So we need to immerse young people, even at 18, even at 20, even us in our own whatever stage of life we may come in, unspecified. Be immersed in these stories still. Well, let's say one more thing on that. Just humanities there acts as a kind of ballast. When I had met with the Dicastery of Education and Culture last year, the undersecretary had mentioned that as we face AI, one of the things we face is leaving certain decisions to the technocratic algorithm. He gave the example of the incredible algorithm that was developed in France that could instantly calculate, faster than any human could, what person in France was most worthy based on the scale of getting this transplant when someone had an accident here and getting it flown to them right away. Says it's amazing. They run through all the factors, it calculates it, boom, we put that organ on a train or a plane and it gets to the person, and no human mind ever makes the life or death decision. Both amazing and terrifying. We need humanities. We need a humanizing education to act as a ballast to keep our society afloat from tipping too far to the extreme of grinding out laws of general principle and thinking that's the same as human interaction. All right, so we've talked about the need to fast. We've talked about the need to be immersed. Now I want to talk about the need to have an integrated and integrating education. An integrated education, we mean, reality itself is one, because it proceeds from the author of reality, who himself, Hear, O Israel, is one. And so we need an integrated view of a diverse reality. Some of the worst errors about philosophy, about theology, are made by some of our best scientists because they have specialized so exclusively on solving this question of general physical law, and they haven't thought even a little bit about the basic distinctions Thomas Aquinas makes, or the philosophical question that Plato poses. A non-integrated view of reality is going to lead to errors because we're going to treat reality as separate compartments, which works for a mind accustomed to grinding out general principles in specialized ways, but doesn't work for humans that actually have to act in the midst of a living culture. So what's that mean at Wyoming Catholic College? Well, that means that we study literature, we study theology, we study philosophy, we study the works of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, but we also study statistics and calculus and astronomy. We study the story in all of its philosophical and scientific implications of the theory of relativity, how we went from Ptolemy to Einstein, and the questions that poses. And we study the question of biology and biological evolution, seeing the incredible scientific evidence for it and the statistical analysis that leads to it, and putting it in dialogue with the questions of Scripture and philosophy. We want an integrated education. We don't want classicists who know Herodotus but couldn't tell you how calculus works or why it's important. We want deep-thinking theologians who can do statistics and tell you whether this is a good or a bad scientific study. That is what an integrated education is. But we also need an integrating education, an education that integrates all the parts of the person to make them able to act as a coherent whole. Again, this is not a new idea. St. Maximus the Confessor goes back to the study of nature, the study of reality, is, as it were, reading a single book. This book is written by God, by the Word who wrote these words with wisdom, and is embodied in them in an ineffable and irrepressible way. He reveals himself through these words, through these works of creation, through the integrated reality before us. And after their careful reading, we can only reach knowledge that he is, that he makes himself known to us as creator, by analogy from the visible created world. But that kind of reading is only possible when we read the world as an integrated whole from an integrated author. And that is the way we're called to read the world. And I will say that almost every one of the major mistakes we are making in our cultural and philosophical and scientific discourse today come from a disintegrated reading of the world. And that disintegrated reading of the world disintegrates us. Hugh of St. Victor, well after St. Maximus the Confessor, wrote, "Wisdom was a book first written inwardly, written in our souls. And the works of wisdom were a book written outwardly, the book of creation. Thereafter, wisdom was written once again outwardly in another way, namely in the incarnation. Wisdom took the human flesh without losing his divinity, so that it could be read outwardly looking at the visible, and inwardly contemplating the invisible, reading outwardly to be healed, reading inwardly to be delighted." We need an education that puts us in contact not just with the works of creation, but with the mystery of the incarnation in a way that heals the wounds in our own soul, teaches us what it means to be a human person with passions, and those passions being rightly ordered, with virtues and the development of those virtues, with thoughts and the development of those thoughts. Then we had a student write, as she looked up on top of a mountain, "That vista that I saw had been formed a millennia ago, so that one day a 19-year-old girl would sit there and know that she was loved and weep. Beauty exists to overwhelm us with the love of our Creator through a direct outpouring of his bounty, a bounty that is directed at us with the same single-minded intention, as if we were the only person who existed and were eminently worthy of love. My heart understood what my head took weeks of thought and writing to reach. My reaction pierced the veil between the visible reality and the invisible meaning, for weeping encompasses both joy and sorrow and surpasses them. It is a personal response to a personal love. Weeping is an integrating action to an integrated education. It puts the powers of the soul, body, and emotions all together to respond to the integrated work that we know through philosophy, mathematics, science, theology, ethics, prayer. It's an integrated response to an integrating education. All right. The education of guardians. We fast. We immerse in the real and in story. We integrate in terms of an integrated study and an integrating effect on us. And then we incarnate that education. We incarnate that education first in a community. The community at Wyoming Catholic College and the community in any, I will say, authentic Christian community is both the place where authentic human formation happens, and it is the place that itself takes part in the education. It is both the place and the instrument of the education. And why is it that way? Because a community embodies rituals. Rituals can only be incarnated. Rituals cannot be downloaded or uploaded. Rituals cannot be scrolled on TikTok. They can only be lived. The American philosopher Wendell Berry makes a distinction between community life and what we'll say the technocratic approach, making the metaphor between path and roads. A path is little more than a habit that comes with knowledge of a place. It is a ritual of familiarity. It is the perfect adaptation through experience and familiarity of movement to place. It obeys the natural contours. Such obstacles as it meets, it goes around. But a road embodies resistance against the landscape. It avoids contact with the landscape. It seeks so far as possible to go over the country rather than through it. Its aspiration, as we see clearly in the example of modern freeways, is to be a bridge. Its tendency is to translate place into space in order to traverse it with the least effort and destroy obstacles in its path. I love the analogy of path and road because I think it captures the difference between embodied community ritual and the dopamine culture. The dopamine culture is quick, it's repeatable, and it ignores authentic human relation as much as possible. Rituals of community, lived rituals in the home, in small groups, in schools, in churches, those are where education happens. Those are where the integrated, immersive education is embodied first. And of course, that happens especially in religious ceremonies. But it happens not only in church, but it spills over. What happens in the liturgy is meant to be embodied in the community, in its calendar, in its rituals throughout the day. That's why we have horses at our Eucharistic processions, or why we build snow altars when we go out camping, why our students sing, and why we have a vibrant Eastern and Western chaplaincy, Eastern Christian Western chaplaincy, for a full, explosive set of rituals that can be embodied, that can be lived, that can be known, and incarnated in real relationships. In a community dedicated to the common goods of the true, the good, and the beautiful. A community concerned with justice and human dignity, and it develops rituals that express and embody that. One of our students wrote, "The change I underwent at Wyoming Catholic College was slow and subtle. The way water and wind carve out a canyon, unweaving and weaving us back together with the words we read and write, the friendships we make, the virtues we cultivate. Wyoming Catholic taught us to embody and live out the tradition we already, in often hidden ways, shared." The education in Plato, the education in theology, the education in Scripture needs to be lived out in a community, in a society. It needs to be embodied. This was Plato's concern, and education for guardians needs to be embodied in the city. It can't be an ivory tower thing. And so when our graduates leave, it needs to be incarnated in service and mission. Our graduates, for their graduation hat, get a cowboy hat. We do that because the American myth sees the cowboy as the person who rides in to save the day. The cowboy at his best is there to save the community, to come in at just the right time, to put his strength and his valor at the service of a town that's hovering on the edge between civilization and chaos. We send our students out with the confidence that they're going to serve and go on with a sense of mission. Because they have fasted, they know how to use technology. Because they've been immersed in the real, they know what real relationships, what real things are. They know the stories of our tradition. They've integrated themselves with virtue. They have a cohesive view of reality. They know what authentic community life means. And most importantly, they know that any good that can be shared without diminishing is not fully had unless it's shared. Any good that can be shared without diminishing is not fully had unless it's shared. And so in the short 20 years of Wyoming Catholic College, our students have worked for the federal government after graduation. They're currently working in the federal government, in think tanks, for state governments, as lawyers, as doctors, priests, religious sisters, married with untold numbers of children, like literally untold numbers of children. We have big families. They're educators. They're literal missionaries. They're entrepreneurs. They know that their fasting, their immersion, and their integration need to be incarnated in their lives of service to the city. They know they've received an education of guardians. This is the call for all educators in the face of the technocratic fire we face. Wyoming Catholic College is pleased to be a front runner and a leader in this. But I'm excited to come talk all the way in Slovakia because I think this is in fact the call for the world. To gather our young people in the wilderness and to teach them for their salvation. In whatever society and whatever culture we find ourselves, to fast in whatever way we can, whether that's on Sundays from our smartphones, whether that's during particular seasons of the year. To immerse ourselves in real relationships and real things, to tell stories around the kitchen table and with our friends and sing songs. To acquire a Catholic that is a universal view of reality and to work on developing those virtues within ourselves and to put that at the service of the world that desperately needs us. This is the education of the guardians that we need. This is the call of Our Lady of Champion. And this is what I'm excited to join you in the face of the technocratic fires that we face. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Kyle, for your wonderful presentation. I now invite on the stage Ms. Terezia Shofrankova, who is a violinist, and she will offer as a sort of short intermezzo for our tonight's event, an interpretation of this composition called Solo Violin in Fis-Moll. Please welcome her with an applause. A great thank you to Teresia Shofrankova for this rather immersive musical experience. I think we all greatly enjoyed it, and I think it helped us all appreciate what education by immersing oneself into the arts can look like, which is something that Kyle has just been speaking to us about. Before I go on to the questions and answers, I just want to say two technical small points. First one, all of you are welcome to ask your questions in Slovak or English. or also in Slido system, find slido.org, or sorry, slide.do, and the password is KHD25. You can ask your questions there, and I'll take them from there. You're also very welcome to ask your questions by raising your hand, both in Slovakian and English. We are able to translate them. My second technical point is to the backstage. If we need to get an earplug for Kyle to understand the Slovak translation, please do that. If not, I can translate for him as well. So that's all for now, technically. Now moving on to the questions. Kyle, thank you so much for your presentation. I deeply, deeply enjoyed it. I think I'm not alone sitting in this room thinking, I wish I could go to college again, and I could wish I could go to Wyoming Catholic. So thank you for giving us a taste of the sort of revival of classical education that you are striving for in Wyoming Catholic. And maybe a first question, a very small question to ask and to start with, that I want to ask to you is, what would our world, our societies, our churches, our parishes, our nations look like if more of us, if more of our young people, young men and women, had the sort of formation that Wyoming Catholic offers? What would be different about the day-to-day? You know, if we look at the news, if we watch the news in the evening, what would people be speaking about? Would it be different themes? Would they be speaking differently about these themes? What would our societies look like if more people were afforded the sort of education that you envision, that you are putting into practice, and that increasingly draws attention in the United States and in Slovakia now as well?
So I think the first thing we would hope to see would be more and more vibrant families. Right, vibrant families who are living this out in the home, passing on stories, singing songs, praying together. So, and in the midst of our concerns about population decrease, I would hope that would not be a concern, the demographic cliff we are worried about. But also, I think we would see that again, the good is diffusive of itself. So from these vibrant families, I think we would have priests who would preach consistently to us. I think the clergy, I'm told, in Slovakia are exceptionally good, and I hear great things about your bishops. But we would have, maybe more generally such a great realization, right? Less priests who are able to communicate the truth effectively to their flock. But I think we'd also have stronger politicians concerned to participate in worship regularly, politicians who communicate the way Plato hopes, right, about the things that are really important and true, but in effective rhetorical ways. And the reason I'm saying all of that is that sounds like, well, kind of utopian or something. But it's what I see in our graduates right now. I see priests who give incredible pastoral, perceptive homilies and are witnessing the faith in incredible ways. I see our graduates that go into politics fighting for policies that integrate their life and are not just making concessions for the sake of efficiency or profit. I see people embodying in the workplace, trying to make their business practices conform to their values. And so I think when I look at our graduates and I see what's coming out, I think there would just be more of that, which we would all rightly rejoice in.
Thank you. Maybe there would be more John Paul II's as well. More bishops and priests leading us into the hills, into the Tatra Mountains perhaps as well. My second question is a bit of I was thinking how I could sort of maybe offer a small challenge, or maybe one sort of critical question I might wish to raise. And I was thinking about, I love the mountains myself. I love the wilderness. I try to spend a lot of time each year in the nature. But I find that maybe this is not within the physical capacity of every single, even young person nowadays. So my question to you is, I can see the universal value of the sort of education that Wyoming Catholic College is pioneering, but how can that sort of experience be offered or mediated in some dose, in some shape, to people who are not of such natural physical fitness, maybe people who are elderly in their age and still strive for this sort of formation. So how can we sort of communicate this sort of experience to such people?
Yeah, I think my impression is that in Slovakia, there's already natural and easy ways to do this. This was also true, at least potentially, in Vienna or in Austria. People go out for walks in the woods, not incredibly challenging walks, not the kind of remote wilderness that we have. Right, our students will hike for 3 weeks and never see a fence or a house or another human person. Those things are not quite possible, probably. But I think those are not necessarily the key point. I think there's any number of ways that it can be done. First and foremost, it happens in the imitative arts. Having natural materials in the home. Maybe not everything natural. We are aware of the cost of living in various ways. But my family has a hand-carved wooden bowl, right, that is there, that connects us. And then when we go on hikes, I have 6 children, and so when we go on hikes, we're not going on incredible excursions. We're going on prepared trails. And there's, find the tree that the bowl is made from and link the bowl's experience to, or the experience of the bowl around the dinner table home to these trees that are growing up. Stargazing seems to me an important one. Going out somewhere where you can look up and see the stars. Maybe not as incredibly crisply as you can from a remote mountain peak, but to be able to go see the stars and tell the stories of the constellations. To visit a farm. Again, I think maybe in Slovakia it's easier, and these aren't romantic things necessarily. Just real things, being real and going out. Even just sitting in a park or looking at a mountain view. In general, the outdoors are not man-made. That's what makes them the outdoors. And that calls us to a kind of transcendence. It puts us in our place. It recalibrates us. And one can do that without doing a 3-week expedition or being a world-class cowboy.
Is it a 3-week expedition at the beginning of each academic year?
It is, no. So the freshmen go on the 3-week expedition that's led by seniors. Then in the subsequent years, they take 2 weeks, 1 week in the spring, 1 week in the fall, and they go out on week-long trips. And they may go out more, but that's the minimum that they all do.
I also wonder if there is, if you are seeing sort of on the rise on the horizon, maybe in the United States, maybe elsewhere around the world. You mentioned you recently visited Dicastery for Education with the Holy See in Rome. Do you see sort of a growing appreciation for these methods of education? Do you feel like something is on the rise? Maybe can you tell us of other encouraging similar initiatives around the world?
So one of the things that is striking, in 2007, when Wyoming Catholic College came on and we had our cell phone fast, all of the smartphone had just come out, and all of the education papers talked about how all of education was going to need to be integrated into this little device. Sort of like when the internet first came out and everyone said all of education needs to be integrated into the internet. And now in the United States, there's 13 states that ban the cell phone in all pre-collegiate education. It's completely banned. And that's happened in the last year. And what's driving that is the twofold awareness that our students, the young people need space away from their phones. And then the second also driving awareness that they need a life of risk. They need a life of play. They need to be out and do things, whether it's on the in the wild outdoors or at least on the playground in a little bit unsupervised play. So I think that's very much happening, and you see that. But you see that conversation starting to happen a little bit in Britain, in Scandinavia. Some of that's already taken place. The focus on education, again, for younger kids especially, needing to be more outside, or interesting experiments in Scandinavia about the importance of incarnating education in community, and therefore having university students live with senior citizens as their college dorm experience, and then going and sharing and talking about what they're studying. And certainly coming out of the Vatican, an increasing focus Pope Francis wrote the letter on the need for literature. This need for humanities is a ballast in education. To not just educate to learn to be a computer coder, partly because everyone's worried that coders won't have a job in a few years with the rise of AI, but partly also realizing that there's a development of the human person that needs to be part of education. I don't know what's happening in the higher ed world here in Slovakia, but certainly in the conversation in Italy, at least in the Vatican, that's very much happening. And you see schools embodying that. There's the Hochschule ETE in Trumau that I think is a good example of that. I think there's some exciting schools starting in Belgium, a college starting in Belgium that's deliberately emulating some of the practices of Wyoming Catholic College. So in general, I think we're at the start of a movement. Now, Catholics are always a minority in the world, so we're always going to be a minority movement, but we're at the start of a movement, and I think we can look forward to seeing further reforms in education.
I think such reforms would certainly find a fertile ground in Slovakia as well. I think many of us, myself included, have grown up going for trips into the mountains. I was formed by the Salesians of John Bosco, who are one of the strongest orders here in Slovakia, and they would always bring us to the Tatra Mountains or any other mountain range, with backpacks on our backs, walking for at least a week. And I think that is the experience of many Slovaks. Also in the times of the underground church, actually, many of the religious orders which were working underground would take young people into the hills of Slovakia. In a way, I mean, maybe Slovakia is a particular sort of fit for this mission because I jokingly say that Slovakia, there has been many empires which have sort of tried to exert its influence over this territory over the past. In the medieval times, it was the Mongols, it was the Ottomans later it was the Nazi Germans, later it was the Soviet communists, coming around during the middle of this 20th century. And what the Slovaks do when something goes wrong, they go up to the mountains here in Slovakia because there's a lot of mountains around here. So I think we have this sort of deeper tendency to escape there, and that is sort of survival strategy in some ways for Slovaks. So I think you would find appreciation for that, and you're probably finding it. My next question is touching on the question of how many students actually Wyoming Catholic has, and what are all these places where they come from across the United States?
So we are deliberately small. At this point, we only admit 60 students a year in each class. And that's because part of the important point is this formation in intensive community. So when I heard that the Honest Institute only takes 12 students a year, I thought, yeah, the idea of small intensive group formation is really an important thing. But we additionally bring 1,000 other students through every year. Some seminarians, some priests, some religious, high school students, other college students, father-son trips on 10-day, 3-week expeditions, because we're convinced the need to share that part of the formation, and we bring an additional 100 high school, a little over 100 high school kids every summer to study with us. Again, trying to find ways of creating these small communities and share this intensive education experience in different ways.
Let us now take some questions from the audience. As I said, we welcome questions both in English and in Slovak. If I can have the microphone come to the gentleman in the first row. The mic is on the way. Please, over here.
Greetings, Andrej Kolarik, Ladislav Hanus Institute. My question regards the fact that you have mentioned that you have an anti-screen policy, that you want people to take a break from the screen. I was wondering, how long does it take for the person who is used to having the mobile phone or the laptop or some kind of screen accessible all the time? How long does it take them to actually adjust to the fact that they are without the screen? Thank you.
Yeah. Studies seem to show that for complete habit transformation, or certainly working through addiction, about 3 weeks turns out to be the magic number. For some people a little bit more, some people a little bit less, but on average about 3 weeks. And by providence, all of our freshmen have 3 weeks. in the mountains without their phones, and so when they come back to campus, there's already been a pretty significant break-in period and a learning to communicate and work in that regard. That being said, the experience of being without the phone can be immediately beneficial for as short as a 12-hour day. If someone's terribly addicted, then we've seen in studies withdrawal symptoms, like you would have if you were withdrawing from any number of other addictions. But someone who's not formally addicted, we see when they've done surveys, someone who gives up their phone for, say, a 12 to 24-hour period, instantly, within 12 hours, we start seeing reduced levels of anxiety. And the longer you sustain that, the longer it goes on. And they've done various experiments with this, more presence to the people around you. And so if you do a 10-day backpacking trip, for example, now the first day there may be some adjustments and things, but we start seeing that reduction in anxiety and better personal engagement and better attention, better memory, better recollection. All of those things instantly start showing. You haven't changed the habit enough so that you go back, you're probably going to need to figure out modes of dealing with the phone, putting it on grayscale, getting various apps or various phones to help with that. But the experience of those 10 days has already been very transformative.
If we can have another question, there was another gentleman in the first row. If we can pass the microphone. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for your testimony. I would like to ask two questions. Firstly, your small Catholic community college, can you imagine to share or at least some principles among other big universities, often secular colleges? And the other question, secondly, I was curious whether during your outdoor activities, whether you read, discuss text, and do those sort of things, whether you incorporate somehow classical education during your trips. Thank you.
Great. So the first one, yeah, in fact, I end up talking at other larger universities, and we have some things that we've seen are really helpful. One is small groups, groups of around 12, but ideally those groups of around 12 being formed within larger groups. So if you get, say, 3 groups of 12 or 4 groups of 12, all of the more groups of 12, the more effective you get for creating a culture or a small micro community. But a small group can work. If the group's too small, it can be sort of overwhelmed by the immense largeness of the university they find themselves in. So a network of small groups is important. Within those small groups, each one making some commitments about rituals in their own way. So is Sunday their screen Sabbath, for example, right? They fast from screens on Sunday, and they all, after Mass, go out for a walk together, and then read a story aloud together, or watch a classic film together, or go to a concert, right? But some kind of rituals around common meals seem really important in this regard, and those common meals incorporating someone like performing a violin or singing songs together, things along those lines, become very, very important. If possible, doing some kind of bonding activity together in that small group, a day-long float trip on the rivers, or again a hike, but the more intensive, the more bonding, it can be really helpful. And then within that group, then committing to some task. We're going to read a book together, so some intellectual task, some spiritual task, and then these communal rituals. Right, the intellectual task helps with that integrated education. The rituals help with the incarnating and ideally the immersive experience. And then the spiritual commitment, again, is one, giving the strength for it, and it also helping both ritually and so I think those are all really important. If you get a mentor from then the outside, someone who's coming in, sharing on a monthly basis, things like that, all of those things can really build up to be increasingly transformational for a small group in a big university. As to the second question about what happens on the outdoor trips, so we do a number of things. One, the leaders of these outdoor trips have memorized a number of poems. So all of our students together have memorized around 40 poems that they all know in common. And so on those outdoor trips, they'll recite the poems. They also have a body of folk music that all of the freshmen sing at the beginning of the day for an hour, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They sing together. So there's this common repertoire of folk music and some spirituals and sacred songs as well. And so we say a huge part of what we want to have happen on those outdoor courses is what we'll call hearth culture or fireside culture, reciting beautiful poems together, singing songs together. Before the students go out, we ask them to choose a constellation and learn the story of the constellation, look up at the night skies and do these things. So that's all very helpful. On the trips with our students themselves, so not the 1,000 students that come in from the outside, but on the trips that we do with our students themselves after the 3-week trip, each student chooses some aspect of the intellectual tradition to share, or the spiritual tradition to share, and they have that as a focus on the day. So while on the 3-week trip we have a 24-hour silent time and there's daily mass and various things that are integrated, on these week-long trips during the school year, each student chooses their own. And so one of my favorite examples, we go ice climbing in January. And I had one picture of one of the guys climbing the ice. These frozen waterfalls. We're ice climbing. And at one point you get up and then you lower yourself down into this dark pit and to do the next climb. And so right before we did that, we're all sort of gathered around. One of the students brought out the end of the Inferno from Dante. Where Dante's lowering down into the ninth circle of hell, and it's this frozen wasteland. And then we lowered ourselves down. Another time, students, we went on a caving expedition, and we just read the myth of the cave and had a discussion about it down in the cave with our headlamps. We've done various things, but that's very much driven by student initiative for, again, a kind of hearth culture or a lived, embodied experience of the culture, less sort of studious academic and more integrated and incarnating.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 final questions, and I will take the right to take them from Slido. So I will ask you 2 final, most popular questions, and I will go one by one. So let's start with the first one. How can we give our children a real education if the schools today and our societies today are not leading them towards that? How can you achieve sort of sustained impact of your students after they return from wilderness and possibly when they leave the school and return back to the technocratic civilization?
Those are both great. Let's start with the first. Well, in this sense, America is spoiled. As I opened, when you're dissatisfied with the school, many Americans just start a new one, which is just easier to do in America in a way than it is with a lot of the regulations and the systems that we have in other countries of the world. Homeschooling tends to be very, very common in America on that same principle, and these networks of free associations of homeschooling families. Alexis de Tocqueville said when he visited the United States in the early 1800s, he had already noted that one of the things that characterizes America is the spirit of free association. And that lets us do things in terms of these schools and things in a different way. That being said, the witness, so Rod Dreher's book, when he talks about live not by lies, and he learned a number of lessons from his time visiting with people in Slovakia, people of the Czech Republic. And there he notes that just reading, he gives the example of reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings as a family allowed together was this really important educational moment. Things along those hearth cultures. But also, if possible, finding ways to influence the education there. I don't know what is all available in Slovakia. But things like the collegium that the Archbishop is doing here at the college level, the collegium that's happening in Bratislava, already those seem like really exciting initiatives that are creative responses to the dictates of the society. What might that look like in the younger ages? I'm not sure. Maybe something in the early afternoons, after the lunch hour, after the students are home, maybe an association at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, meeting once a week to do a story and a guided, getting someone to come lead a reading group. These sorts of things seem like real options. But it is, here's the good news. All of this is so good that any little bit of it we do is going to bear great fruit. Oftentimes, when I'm going around, I talk to folks, and they're worried because they can't do the perfect thing. They can't go be in this remote mountain village and offer this incredible education with all these PhDs and do it all like this. But you don't have to, right? You just need to tell a story every night or sing a song, and that'll be amazing. Will it be as good as like the absolute perfect thing? Well, no. But will it be good? Yeah. So do the good thing. Let's find the good things we can do. And especially with kids, every little bit of that goodness we give them, of that fasting, of that immersion, of that integration and that incarnation is just going to be great. So, there. 2, the question of what do we do for the after effects? Well, as is not surprising perhaps, the stronger the after effects are, the stronger the student stays with the experience. So a student that comes on a 3-week backpacking trip with us and then goes back with nothing, the after effects are going to wear off. So we try to do some creative things. And for all I'm talking about fasting from technology, we try to do some other creative things. We give graduates from our 3-week trips who aren't enrolled in our college free subscriptions to Hallow, the prayer app. And we have a group on that app that meet and have specific reflections. And there's a program on that app that's specifically talking about how to fast from your smartphone. You have to get on the smartphone to learn how to fast from your smartphone. So it's a little odd. But, again, any little bit we do is good. So, we do what we can. So, some of those after effects we see are very helpful. With our students, the sort of sustained experience, by the time they go back home for Christmas, they've already been holding the jade, so to speak, so long that they come and find all of their friends addicted to phones or listening to bad music or wasting their time on whatever. And they recognize it, and they miss the jade. They miss the real thing. And then the goal is, the more that you inculcate these habits, are you going to be able to live them perfectly? No, you go out and you then try to form another community, and you try to pass it on. But we do surveys of our graduates. Our graduates' use of tech is consistently far lower than the national averages. Our graduates still make time to read a book aloud every once in a while. And these are graduates now with very young families. Our graduates are still practicing their faith at very, very high numbers. Our graduates are very much trying to carry on these things. Do they do it perfectly? No. But I think that formation, especially from 18 to 22, is a really critical time for forming long-term adult habits, and we see it sustains very well.
One final, very short question. You offered the cowboys in the United States as the archetype of guardians, of Plato's guardians. From your knowledge of European culture, who would you set for Europe as the guardians within our own home context?
Well, so the cowboys, I think, the reason I give the cowboys is I root the story actually in the story of Don Quixote. That Cervantes fought in the Battle of Lepanto. And when he fought in the Battle of Lepanto, he sort of witnessed the modern armaments that characterized increasingly the Ottoman forces. And by at least some accounts, when he first wrote Don Quixote, he wrote it to kind of make fun of the ideal of the knight errant, right? He writes it through this layer of layers. He's discovered this manuscript that was written by or at least translated by a Muslim, and he's translating that, and it's sort of this mockery of the image of knighthood. And then he writes Don Quixote just to make fun of this ridiculous guy that tries to be a knight in the modern era and goes out and has read these terrible fantasy novels about Orlando Furioso, and goes out and tries to do these things, and is meaning it as, seems initially meaning it as mean-spirited mockery, and then falls in love with Don Quixote in spite of himself. And by the end of it has sort of come to see something really, really noble in this. And you see him sort of yearning, if only there could be an embodiment of this sort of Christian knighthood, this Christian guardianship that wasn't so outdated and ridiculous looking. Now, at the same time he's feeling that, these young Spanish sons are coming to ride out in America, and they start wearing wide-brimmed hats, and they start roping, and they start carrying revolvers, and eventually from them the vaquero and the cowboy comes to be born, and this modern this yearning for a modern embodiment of that knight spirit in a very American way sort of comes out in the cowboy. But it seems to me that in the story of Christendom, Christian knighthood at the level of myth, right? When you drill down into the history of the cowboy, historians will poke on these. But at the level of mythical archetype, it seems Christian knighthood and the Christian missionary, the Cyril and Methodius, hold special places for the capturing of that imagination. The Christian knighthood's nice because it was a lay movement. The Christian missionary, maybe some blend of Christian missionary and Christian knighthood. That wears a cool hat. Maybe that's what Slovakia needs. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Please, big applause.
Thank you so much. A ďakujeme aj Samuelovi. Ďakujem.